Hello and welcome to my personal project Marshtown. Marshtown is an animation project I've been working on for a few months now that I've decided to share the process of with you. And if you'd like to know more about the project, you can click the link in the description below, or there might be a cue card above that you can click as well. So far, most of the videos have been about creating the world and writing the story. And as it stands now, the story for part 1, which is all we're doing for now, is complete. I've made some few adjustments to the document that I was writing on the computer, mostly changing things from present tense to past tense, which feels more like a story when you read it. And there was a few parts that were just notes and camera directions, and this is what happens. So I've sort of expanded those to fit better with the bits that were written more fuller. So it's a bit more consistent now when you read it. And I have decided to present this to you so far as a free audiobook. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a budget, so as much as I'd love to, I can't pay Andy Serkis to read this to you, and I don't really have the confidence in my own voice to narrate the story myself. So that leaves me in a tricky position, and I decided, well, I'll try out an AI narration, and so that's what I'm using. Now, I think that I'm quite certain this is going to be the only time that I use AI. For one, I'm not really a fan of AI, and I don't think a lot of artists are. And two, I just like creating things myself. The creative process is the fun part, and I don't want to give that up to AI. So, this will be the only time I use it, I think. Having said all of that, here is a free audiobook for part 1 of Marshtown, and I hope you enjoy it.
Marshtown, Chapter 1, Ogrod and Celetse, by Nicholas R. Green.
The sky was filled with darkness, like a blanket of pure black. In the distance, small flickers of light bounced through the clouds, only to be engulfed by darkness again, until another flicker and another appeared. Small sparks of energy traveled through puffy clusters of vapor. This was followed by a vibrating band of opposing energy and a screeching shriek. Spittles of rain fell from a torn cloud, while the opposing flashes of light and pulsating blasts continued to battle each other. Each time the second released a high-pitched yell until they collided, and a deafening cry was followed by an eerie silence. Something started to fall, at first slowly, and then picking up speed. The small silhouette of a girl plummeted through the clouds towards the ground below. A muddy bog broke the shadow's fall as she hit the thick, dirty water like a speeding meteor. Splash! A mud-drenched fairy emerged from the swamp. Still in shadow, she crawled along the weeds and reeds. She realized that she had injured one of her wings and could not fly. She found herself caught in twigs and branches and discarded her ruined clothing, but there was enough mud to cover her modesty. The rain began to subside. Peering through the foliage and plants, she saw in the distance a house built into a tree. A hoverfly landed on a plant near her, attracted to her, and the smells from the bog that had covered her head to toe. It buzzed around her, annoying her and making her a little panicky. She swatted her arms around, trying to get rid of it. Suddenly, a great tongue whipped out and made her jump. It snatched the hoverfly from her as quick as lightning, and she saw a great toad swallowing the pest. Its bulging eyes stared at her, and she nodded towards it, saying,
"Thank you."
As she started to walk away, she could still somehow feel its bulbous eyes boring into the back of her head. It began slowly turning its head towards her. She stopped walking. Very nervously, she took gradual steps and began to turn around, only to find the toad still behind her, as if she hadn't walked anywhere at all. It waddled forward slightly, blinking its huge eyes. She carefully took a step forward, and so did the toad. Then, in a sudden burst, she started to sprint as best she could, but she felt a sharp pain in her leg and ran with a slight limp. She hopped and ran away from the bog, and the toad hopped along after her with intent. She felt something slap her shoulder. It stung and left a thick, wet patch on her. Snap! Again she felt what must have been a tongue whip out at her back, sticking momentarily before peeling back off as she picked up speed, forgetting all about her injured leg. A third and final effort from the toad proved unyielding for the slimy beast, and it gave up its pursuit. She limped on, relieved to be free, only to find herself walking straight into another threat, a huge predatory owl. This time she had a moment to prepare and reached for her wand, but there was nothing where it should have been.
"Ah, my wand!"
she exclaimed, looking around the grass near her. The huge bird flapped its wings, hovering above her, and trying to claw and grab her with its sharp talons. She ducked and shifted side to side, trying to avoid capture. Its large feathered wings struck against bushes and trees, making a lot of noise. This was heard by the resident of the house built into the tree. Inside the house, asleep in an armchair, by a fireplace, pipe in mouth, a bearded gnome is awoken by the noise and commotion outside. Startled from a dream, he dropped his pipe into his lap and grunted in annoyance as he slowly arose from his creaky wooden chair. The old gnome grabbed his walking stick and slowly hobbled outside to see what was going on, and as he approached the edge of the bog, he startled the owl, and it flapped its giant wings and flew away into the night sky. Squinting through his wrinkled eyes, he looked around, but could not see what had riled up the bird. Neither could he see the shivering fairy below him, too afraid to speak to the mountainous shadow that towered over her. Gnomes are very short to a human, but to a fairy no more than 5 inches or 13 centimeters, whichever you prefer. Gnomes are indeed very tall, so I'm sure you can understand her reluctance to speak up. After a few moments of searching, he gave up and hobbled back to the house, mumbling to himself the whole way and slamming the door on the way back in. Cautiously the small fairy followed, pushing past large leaves and thick, long blades of grass. A pathway bordered with stones and foliage led to the front door, but she diverted from the path to climb a hanging basket of flowers by a window at the side of the house. She peered in the window to see what was inside. She saw him turning a handle in a circular motion, and a large dry leaf slowly sliding down a wooden board into the disc he was turning. Out of the bottom into a tray fell shredded strings of the brown leaf, and he stuffed it into his pipe and lit it with a match. He then made his way to the window. As he approached, she hid behind the plants in the basket. She was still caked in mud, which made her hard to see among the soil and flowers in the basket. He opened the window and looked down. It seemed as though he was looking right at her. Or was he looking right past her? Or noticing something next to her? She kept as still as she possibly could, trying not to breathe too heavily. His eyes narrowed, his brows lowered, and he released a low and annoyed grunt. Had he seen her? Maybe he was looking at the plants. His hand reached for something out of sight, and she watched his hand nervously expecting a bat or another sort of weapon to swat her with. When his hand returned, it was holding a watering can. He watered the plants, but some of the fountain of water flowing from the pipe washed the mud from her shoulders, so she showered underneath the water, cleaning off the thick swamp sludge. It felt so good to be clean again. That is when he saw her.
Go on, get out of here.
He waved his hand about and knocked her off the basket. As she fell, she grabbed a stem from a lady's smock in the basket, but it bent and snapped in the middle, coming down with her as she tumbled towards the grass below. She scrambled away with the flower as fast as her legs could carry her, her feet slipping along the wet carpet of green. At last, she found shelter under a giant mushroom. Hiding under the mushroom, her pounding heart started to slow, but as it did, she began to feel very cold and pushed her feet through the flower she was still holding onto. Like a lady struggling to push her legs into a pair of tights, she wrapped her top with a strange leaf she noticed nearby and tied it all off with the stem. She sat for a while and watched the moon crawl across the sky above the house, her eyes growing heavy. Flash! A cloud bursts with light and goes black again. Flash! Rain dapples on her terrified face and again is shrouded in darkness. Flash! Flash! A clawed hand slashes at her wing. She tries to dodge, but her wing is torn by the razor-like nails. Another white blast of electricity lights up the skull of a giant bird, and a deafening squawk wakes her from the nightmare. She was now lying on top of a broken upside-down mushroom. The sun was rising, and she decided she could have a look near where she landed to find some of her belongings that she lost during the previous night. She found a pouch she made out of a large leaf dangling and slightly tangled in the branches that she had previously been caught on, and on the ground below it a wand snapped in two.
Oh no, Grandma made that for me.
She picked up the items and returned to the mushroom to sit and examine her broken wand. As the sun began breaking through the trees, the beauty of the garden could be seen in all its glory: pink, yellow, and orange ladies' smock flowers, purple strife plants, a spatter of flowering rush, and large green-yellow leafy hosta junes ran alongside a stony walkway, leading to the front door of what could now be recognized as a mud hut built into the roots of a tree, the thick roots and branches acting like the timber beams and support struts of a regular house. The side wall was overgrown with enormous marrows, and separated from the main house was a small house for a pony. Inside the mud house, the gnome was brewing a nettle tea. He grabbed a spoon and went to get the sugar, but it could not be found.
Bloomin' hell's the sugar.
He scanned his surroundings.
Shop here. I haven't moved it.
He moaned. He decided to forego the sugar, but he knew the tea would not be the same without it. Looking out of the window, he saw a fairy sitting on a mushroom, trying to move her injured wing. Each time she did, the wing would tremble and close up, and she winced in pain. It was a pathetic sight indeed. He walked over to her with an acorn and a kettle, and after pulling the top off of the acorn, he placed the lid of it beside her on the upturned mushroom and filled it with tea from the kettle. The tea was sort of sour tasting, and it made her grimace.
This tea is bitter. What kind is it?
She asked.
No, don't like it. Don't drink it.
He grunted, realizing that she had offended him. She tried a second sip and tried to smile.
Actually, it quite grows on you.
But he was unconvinced. Grunted the old man. He stared at her for a moment, and she tried not to make eye contact. He noticed her broken wand lying beside her.
What's that?
A wand. Or it was.
She said, holding it up to her face so the broken half dangled.
I'm a carpenter. Can fix it.
Well, that's very kind of you, but I'm afraid only a wizard or witch could fix this.
Blue bottle?
He replied, with no explanation. Looking a little confused, the young girl asked,
Blue bottle?
He's the only wizard round these parts. Lives upstream, past the bog. Bit of a funny one, if you ask me.
Now he was the one looking like he had something bitter in his mouth, but it wasn't the tea. Celeste looked over to the stream.
Blue bottle,
she said to herself thoughtfully.
And what's your name?
In an effort to try and get to know this peculiar loner.
Ogrod.
I'm Celeste.
She tried to sound as friendly as she could, but it was in vain.
Yeah. So, we know each other's names. Don't go thinking that makes us friends.
And with that, he walked off back to the house. After tea, Ogrod fed his pony a carrot and led him to his wagon. He placed a stack of dried tobacco leaves on the back and a few wooden sculptures, rabbits, foxes, owls, that sort of thing. He got into the cart and they made their way into town. Celeste watched the cart make its way through the dirt path and into the forest, and climbed back up the window she had also climbed up the night before. After noticing the window was open crack, she squeezed inside. Everything was covered in dust and wood shavings. There were carpentry tools laying around and several wooden sculptures, but it was hard to make them out under all the dust. She hopped down onto a table below by the tobacco shredder and opened her pouch. First, she took out a solid gold egg and placed it beside her. Then she reached into the pouch again and retrieved a glass jar containing several different colored moths. She opened the jar and whispered a name to the moths, and a grey-black mottled moth climbed onto her hand. She gently threw it into the air. It fluttered around the room, eating all of the dust covering the sculptures, revealing very detailed and realistic-looking wooden foxes, badgers, rabbits, and a large, beautiful human woman with an ornate jeweled necklace. It continued around the room, cleaning the tables, walls, everything, until the room was almost sparkling, and the moth had tripled in size. It flew past her and managed to push the window completely open with ease, squeezing out, as it was not bigger than the opening, fluttering away into the garden. Now that the room was clean, she took time to have a little look around. Meanwhile, Ogrod was finishing his trades at the edge of the village with a human man. He had bright white hair, wore dungarees and had a jolly disposition. He finished loading the last sculpture and made some funny remark about the animal it represented and chuckled to himself. Then he loaded the tobacco leaves on and paid Ogrod in coins.
Nice doing business with you. See you in a fortnight then.
He said happily and began to sing a little song to himself as he walked off.
Here we sit, three little birds, little birds, little birds. Here we sit, three little birds, till our mum brings us home.
Ogrod climbed his wagon and began his way back home. Upon entering his house, he found it was not how it was left, and there was a fairy standing on his carpentry desk, placing a tool back on its hanger. Somehow she had managed to tidy a lot of things up, despite her size.
What are you doing in here?
He shouted with a furious look on his face.
I wanted to
She attempted to explain, but was cut off.
What you been doing? Moving me stuff about.
Again she tried to defuse the situation.
I thought you'd be pleased.
Pleased? Pleased that you brought into my home and started messing with my things? Now go on, get out. Off with you.
She looked shocked and confused at his anger and ran through the open door behind him. After the argument, Ogrod walked around the room, pacing in a circle, mumbling and grumbling to himself the whole time.
Nosy little midge, coming in here. Who does she think she is? Cleaning up. I ask her to clean up? No, I really didn't. This is my house, and I want it dusty. And that's my... There it is!
Just then he saw it. He lifted up the ceramic jar labelled sugar.
I've been looking everywhere for this. Must have been covered up in all that dust.
Suddenly realizing the kindness that she had done for him, his voice and face softened. He looked around at the place, all of his tools neatly lined up on the hanging wall, the widows shining and the wooden sculptures gleaming. He lingered on the human woman for a while and spoke to it.
Suppose it does look nice, doesn't it?
Back with Celeste, sitting on the same mushroom again, sobbing, arranging little mushrooms from small to large in a nice, neat, ordered row. The largest of the mushrooms stood up to reveal little legs and a face. It stuck its tongue out at her and ran off. She wiped tears from her eyes and picked up her broken wand to look at it.
Blue bottle.
She said to herself.
Up the stream.
She said. Thinking out loud, she looked over to the stream, her face becoming focused. Time to leave, she thought to herself, and made her way towards the stream. There were thick, rooty trees either side of it and no pathway. She had little choice but to wade in the water if she wanted to follow it. The air was thick with a green fog of moisture, but she moved on with strong determination. Meanwhile, Ogrod was making marrow stew and talking to the statue again.
Oh, I know, she was trying to be kind. But it's my stuff, I say. My stuff.
He looked over to the sculpture of the woman and took a deep inhale.
Suppose I did overreact, though.
His face softening and almost as quick hardening again.
But she shouldn't have been in here.
Again he looked over to the sculptures.
I should apologise, I know that.
He said it as if the statue had told him to say sorry, and as he looked at the wooden woman, he saw gleaming behind her a golden egg.
It's not mine. She must have left here.
Then he let out a long, resonating sigh, with so much air his cheeks puffed out like a blowfish.
Okay, then, off I go.
He began to walk over towards her usual spot, carrying the egg and a bowl of piping hot marrow stew for her.
Look, I've come to say, well, I'm sorry.
He began as he approached her mushroom.
I've made you some stew and you left this bit up.
And then he saw that she was gone. He looks disappointed. He had finally built the courage up to say sorry, something that was not easy at all for him, and now it was too late. He looked at the empty acorn lid that once had her nettle tea in, and the regret sin. His face was clear. Without warning, he heard flapping, and then sharp talons pierced his shoulders, and was he as pulled into the air by something black? A bowl of stew smashed on the ground, bits of ceramic splintering everywhere, a golden egg hits the grass, and next to it, black feather gleaming green and purple. And thundering flaps of wings are accompanied by a loud squawk. End of chapter 1.